Hi everyone, my name is Bertrand and I'm the author of this book, Navigating Disruption Media Relations in the Digital Age. So in this video, I explain to you why you should read my book, and I also break down the book into chapters and explain to you what you can learn from each chapter. So in this book, I detail how traditional newsrooms have transformed and the way in which media relations professionals have adapted to this new media landscape, an area in which there are many new digital media players as well as influencers. I also share about the PR industry and the skills needed for communicators, skills in areas such as telling stories, how to write press releases, how to pitch to journalists, how to plan campaigns, as well as managing crises. And all of these learning points are framed through my life story as detailed in this book. So in chapter 1, the global dominance of US media, I paint my problem statement about media and influence and how the US has a formidable media ecosystem and overwhelming influence in the world. So this chapter sets the groundwork of explaining why storytelling through the media is important. And I start off the chapter with my own undergrad experience in the United States, where I explain the differences between Americans and Singaporeans through my own perspective. One key learning point is in learning about freedom of expression in the United States and how such a culture encourages vibrant storytelling and a vibrant media landscape. In chapter 2, The Road to Louisville, Kentucky, I explain what it's like to be an Asian in America by walking readers through my own experience as an intern reporter in Louisville, Kentucky. So Louisville, Kentucky is a city where I did my post-graduation newspaper internship under a scholarship to encourage minority students in newsrooms. Hence, this chapter helps me to frame up my thoughts on media representation. So Asian representation is generally lacking in US mainstream media. Many stereotypes keep getting rehashed. And to digress, a white friend of mine actually expressed to me that she felt that Asian representation and understanding in the US is among the lowest in US mainstream community. So this chapter really explains the importance of role models and representation, and by explaining the differences between Singapore media versus that of US media. I end off this chapter on a somewhat unrelated note, and that is to share about a retrenchment exercise that took place in the very newsroom that I was working in. So this transitions to a major theme in my book, and that is about digital disruption and the troubles that afflicted traditional newsrooms. Chapter 3 is Life as a TV News Producer, and it walks readers through TV newsroom operations. So chapter 3 begins with me returning to Singapore and landing a job as a news producer in a TV newsroom. And it's here that I explain how TV news producers craft their stories for the audience. And it's through this sharing that I delve into a key aspect of newsrooms KPIs, and that is breaking news. And also I share about the stresses that come with covering breaking news and going through the breaking news cycle. In chapter 4, CNA from TV to Transmedia, this is a meaty chapter because I dovetail into how digital disruption impacted the newsroom. So I begin the chapter by setting the scene and talking about the Netflix generation, and this is the group of youths and young adults today who are consuming news differently. I also briefly talk about the rise of digital media players in Singapore. So this sets the stage for the story of the battle between CNA versus ST, the Straits Times, on social media. And I also detail the differences between both companies in the areas of profits, paywalls, and funding. In chapter 5, I paint a portrait of Singapore's media landscape, beginning with the media liberalisation period. So this liberalisation period refers to a time of intense competition between our Singapore traditional media giants, SPH and Mediacorp, where the government has sort of relaxed the rules to allow for each one to compete with the other in areas that they are considered monopolies in. For example, SPH was granted a TV license while Mediacorp was granted a newspaper license. So I detail in this chapter the rivalry between them, as well as the rise of new digital media players and how those new players will go on to compete with the traditional giants for audience share. So chapter 6 tells the story of how I got acquainted with public sector communication and learned about the world of corporate communications. So in this chapter, I explain the differences between corporate communications versus a life in the newsroom. I then go on to explain the ABCs of media relations, such as media monitoring and managing interviews and handling media queries. So this chapter is really good for those who are interested to learn more about media relations and corporate communications. So in this chapter, planning the digital PR campaign, I dive into some basic tactics for getting earned media. So I start off this chapter by explaining how political communication has moved into the digital media space, because politicians realize that that's the best platform to engage youth. So this chapter is really about media engagement tools, where I talk about how to write press releases and how to go about pitching to journalists as well as influencers. And one important thing is that I explain news values and how news values can be applied when it comes to pitching and storytelling. Next, I launch into how to organize publicity campaigns and also about influencer engagement. So here I enlist the help of an influencer, Fauzi Aziz from the Smart Local, who shares with me about this very topic. So chapter 8 is on Singaporean brand journalism, and this is a heavy chapter because it covers Singapore politics and government control of the media through media laws. I go into Singapore's formative history to tell the story about our country's first TV station. So this story is meant to illustrate the mindsets the early founding leaders had about media and influence. So this was a point in time when Parliament was debating about introducing TV technology to the country, and they were talking about whether it should be a public model or a private model. So here again, the topic of the media's law is revisited. So this sets up the stage to explain why the government is motivated to want to have controls over expression. I then draw parallels between Singapore's early media law, the Newspaper and Printing Presses Act, with that of today's POFMA, the contentious law regarding controls over falsehoods online. I cap off the chapter with an interview with a world-class expert on fake news, NTU Associate Professor Edson Tundok, who shares with me about the rise of fake news through social media. Chapter 9 returns to corporate communication, and it visits the essence of strategic messaging of the vision, mission, and value statements of the company. So I start off this chapter by telling the story of SAS's turnaround. So SAS is a Scandinavian airline, and they were having financial trouble back in the 1980s. So in order to save the airline, they appointed a new CEO, and he applied a communication strategy to galvanize the workforce, and it worked. This leads to my interview with lecturer and PR consultant Ferdinand Dibaka, who shares with me about the importance of the corporate credo, that is, the vision, mission, and value statement. I sum up this chapter by explaining how to design a message house. And this is really a framework or a matrix to design corporate messages for different stakeholders. So chapter 10 is a case study of employee engagement at the oil giant Royal Dutch Shell. So this review into Shell is based on a group project that details the strategic moves that Shell applies to keep its workforce engaged. For example, in applying policies on inclusiveness and in regularly polling the staff in order to get feedback on what to improve. So chapter 11 is what's next for public relations professionals, and it talks about the evolving role of the corporate communications officers in 3 major areas: in the future trends for communicators, the roles and responsibilities, as well as in managing crisis communication in the digital age. In this last final chapter of my book, I interviewed 2 experts. The first expert shares a bit more about strategic communication in the digital age, and the second expert shares with me about content marketing in the digital age and how to tell stories specifically for social media. So this chapter is really a look ahead into key industry trends. So this really helps to give an understanding of the skills needed for PR professionals in the digital age. That is, skills in the area of digital storytelling, of media analytics, as well as of an understanding in current affairs in areas such as artificial intelligence and communication, where ethics is of paramount importance. Thank you for watching my video. I really hope you enjoyed this breakdown of each chapter of my book. If you like what you've just seen, then please go and get a copy of my book. The links are in the description below.